Cold case solved by Public Science Genealogy, the Golden State Killer, California. Before you go, subscribe for more gripping crime stories. Like for answers and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into true crime together. The year was 2018, and a quiet Sacramento suburb was about to witness the unraveling of a mystery that had haunted California for more than 4 decades. Inside a dimly lit lab, detectives stared at a computer screen as a digital family tree began to bloom. Names, faces, DNA matches spreading across the screen like roots seeking the truth. Then came the alert. A strong match. A name none of them expected to see: Joseph James DeAngelo. The room went silent. Could this aging, unassuming man be the ghost who terrorized an entire state? Rewind to the 1970s. California was thriving: sunlight, open roads, and a growing sense of suburban security. But beneath that golden glow lurked something sinister. In East Sacramento, a young couple was found bound in their home, their quiet evening shattered by an intruder who moved with precision. It wasn't just a robbery. It was fear taking form. Soon, similar attacks followed across the region: break-ins, assaults, disappearances. The media gave him a name that would freeze the hearts of millions: the East Area Rapist. He was invisible, calculating. He would study his victims for weeks, sometimes calling them beforehand to whisper threats that turned their nights into endless dread. "I'm watching you," he would say before hanging up. Every detail of his attacks suggested military discipline: his knots, his escape routes, his ability to vanish into the night. The police were desperate. Task forces were formed, curfews issued, and entire neighborhoods lived in terror. But he never slipped up. Not once. Years turned into decades. The attacks stretched beyond Sacramento, into Modesto, Contra Costa, and down south. The crimes grew darker. Bodies began to appear. The same signature, the same eerie silence afterward. Investigators began to connect the dots, realizing that this wasn't just one killer, it was one man evolving, changing names, and moving across the state. He had become a phantom known as the original Night Stalker. By the late 1980s, the trail had gone cold. DNA evidence existed, but technology wasn't there yet. Families grieved, detectives retired, and the world moved on. But the victims' families didn't forget. They kept the memory alive, hoping science might someday catch up to the monster who stole their peace. Then, nearly 40 years later, in a world transformed by technology, a young investigator entered the scene with a bold idea. Instead of waiting for the killer to make a mistake, they would use public genealogy databases, places where ordinary people uploaded their DNA to find relatives. It was a risky move, a new frontier in forensics. But one quiet evening, the decision changed everything. As the screen flashed with the name DeAngelo, one detective whispered, "After all these years, it's him." And the next morning, while the sun rose over Citrus Heights, officers surrounded a small, suburban home. Inside sat a retired police officer, sipping coffee, unaware that the ghosts of his past were closing in. When they knocked on his door, what followed would shock the entire nation. When officers approached the modest home in Citrus Heights, Joseph James DeAngelo looked more like a quiet retiree than a man accused of terrorizing California. He was 72, gray-haired, and polite, the kind of neighbor who waved when you passed by. But that calm exterior shattered the moment detectives took him into custody. They had finally captured the man they believed was the Golden State Killer. Inside his house, investigators uncovered what could only be described as the mind of a predator frozen in time. Boxes filled with carefully labeled items, mementos from victims, newspaper clippings, old police scanners, and notes lined the garage. It was as if DeAngelo had built a shrine to his own crimes. He had lived a double life for decades: a husband, a father, a police officer, and at night, the faceless nightmare who broke into homes across California. As detectives pieced through the evidence, they couldn't believe how close he had always been to them. In the 1970s, DeAngelo had served as a police officer in Auburn and Exeter, giving him inside knowledge of investigations, police tactics, and how to avoid detection. When he was fired for shoplifting in 1979, the murders had abruptly stopped, a pattern no one had connected back then. The DNA link that led to him was undeniable. Using samples from old crime scenes, investigators uploaded the genetic profile into a public genealogy database. Slowly, matches began appearing, distant relatives who unknowingly helped map out the killer's family tree. Through painstaking analysis, detectives narrowed it down to a single name. And when they compared DeAngelo's discarded DNA from his trash to the crime scene evidence, it was a perfect match. As the news broke, the entire country erupted. Victims' families who had waited decades for justice wept openly. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, documenting every detail of the man once believed to be a myth. Even seasoned detectives struggled to describe the moment. "It's like catching a ghost," one officer said. "We'd stopped believing he was real." But what stunned everyone most was how normal DeAngelo's life had been. His neighbors remembered him as quiet, though prone to bursts of anger. He'd ride his motorcycle, fix his car in the driveway, and talk about fishing trips, all while hiding the darkest secret imaginable. And as DeAngelo sat silently in an interrogation room, refusing to speak, investigators could only wonder, how many others had he planned to kill before time and science finally caught up? The courtroom in Sacramento was silent when Joseph James DeAngelo was wheeled in. Wearing an orange jumpsuit, frail and quiet, he looked nothing like the terror that haunted California for decades. Survivors and families of victims filled every seat, their eyes locked on the man who had stolen their peace, their loved ones, and their sense of safety. For 40 years, the Golden State Killer had been a faceless shadow. Now, he was finally real, and he was right in front of them. DeAngelo initially stayed motionless as prosecutors read out the details of his crimes, rapes, murders, and home invasions stretching from Sacramento to Santa Barbara. Each word echoed like a scar reopening. Victims stood to speak, their voices trembling but resolute. "You destroyed lives," one survivor said through tears. "But you didn't win. We're still here." The case was airtight. DNA evidence from multiple scenes matched him. Old police reports, witness accounts, and his own belongings tied everything together. Yet what struck people most wasn't just the evidence, it was his calmness. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He only whispered, "I'm sorry," once, almost too softly to hear. In August 2020, after years of legal proceedings and public anticipation, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 murders and 13 kidnappings. In exchange, he avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The courtroom erupted in emotion, not celebration, but release. For many, it was the first time in decades they could finally breathe again. Still, the story didn't end there. The Golden State Killer's capture marked a turning point in criminal justice. Investigators had used genetic genealogy, an approach that combined traditional detective work with DNA analysis and public genealogy databases. It proved that even the coldest cases could be solved. That time no longer meant safety for those who thought they had escaped justice. DeAngelo's case changed everything. Across the United States, detectives began reopening decades-old files, hoping DNA could finally speak for the victims who no longer could. As DeAngelo sat in his prison cell, his double life, the devoted father, the friendly neighbor, the monster in the dark, had come to an end. The world finally knew the truth. And for the families who had waited half a lifetime for answers, it wasn't just about punishment. It was about proof that evil could be unmasked, even after 40 years of silence. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the world's darkest crimes are only just beginning to surface.